Beautiful creatures, hello, and welcome to League Unlock. Eric and Mark hanging out with you guys today, and as we continue to wait for the off-season to end and things to get in the full swing of things, it gives us the opportunity to do a little bit of a special deep dive episode, and it's a bit of an homage to players past. With Dardoch coming to TSM, he is the team's 9th jungler that they've had in the organization's history, which gives us the opportunity to look back at the other 8 junglers and rank them all the way down to number 1.
It's time to take a dark turn here on League Unlock and walk down into the TSM graveyard of junglers here. But at the same time, it's going to be a little bit positive here. You always, if you have a funeral, you got to talk positively about the dead, and here we go, the dead TSM junglers. Time to talk a little bit positively about what we saw from them, but at the same time, remind you why this is the TSM graveyard of junglers.
And the afterlife has been pretty good to a lot of these junglers. It's like these shackled chains have been lifted free when they leave TSM, but starting at number 8. And by the way, this position, you went many years with only a couple of junglers playing, and then all of a sudden, 2018-19, there's 4 junglers that are getting thrown in less than a 2-year span. But number 8, it's almost unfair to put SPICA here because he was put in, I mean, you have to put him 8th because he's played the least, he did the least on the squad, but he was put in such a horrible situation. I really hope that it doesn't just completely derail and ruin this poor young man's career.
Now, really, when you're looking at this ranking here, there's not a lot of room here for people to switch spots and grow, but this is actually the only one I feel that can be changed as time goes on. SPICA still, with the organization, still has a chance here with the Academy team to improve upon this ranking, but right now, solid here at the very bottom. Can't give him too much flack here for what was going on behind the scenes and everything, and he did his darndest here. Had a couple of moments, actually managed to steal a Baron. Remember that one? That one is one of the bright spots from his time on TSM with the main roster, but certainly not the best memories.
And it was a short-lived time on that starting roster. And keep in mind, when we're looking at these guys, we're talking only their time on Team Solo Mid. Before and after, it's not taken into consideration. So SPICA has the smallest resume to go off of. And yeah, he had a few okay games, but he was playing Sejuani in most of these games. He only played 3 different characters or champions, and he played all the playoffs and through the regionals as well, which was only that one best of 5 against Clutch. But really unfortunate circumstance for him. Unfortunately, he's got to be 8th.
Yeah, finds himself at the very bottom of the list here, but again, room to grow here for him still with the organization.
Maybe some way he'll come back to that starting roster if Dardoch doesn't work out in that spot. Number 7 is somebody who actually had a lot of hype coming into the year. It was supposed to be a super team in the making, and we know what happened to TSM in 2018. Mike Young and the rookie of the split. Here's the problem. There was too many expectations for him so early on his career. He only played half a split. He looked great at Rift Rivals. All of a sudden, he's getting voted into All-Stars. He's on the premier, at the time, NA organization, the best we've ever seen. There was just an incredible amount of pressure, and I'd hate to say it, but it absolutely got to him.
It completely crashed here with Mike Young in that situation. The hype train was at its peak here heading towards this split. You had all the roster changes going on with Team Solo Mid, and yes, not all of them had people completely sold on that roster here, but one that a lot of people liked was having Mike Young step into that jungler position here. Young, fresh blood in this situation, and again, coming off of the Rookie of the Year performance that he did have with Phoenix One, that was something that a lot of people wanted to see onto TSM and translate through, and well, hey, you never really saw that high-tempo jungler gameplay that you wanted to get here from Mike Young. You didn't see it with the main TSM roster, and he absolutely does deserve to take his fair share of the blame here for the failures of that year.
And it's one of the things to monitor when you're looking at all these guys' careers is, of course, the TSM turns your jungler into a ward meme. Mike Young was incredibly aggressive on P1. He was the focal point of the early game. Absolutely everything ran through him. And then all of a sudden there were games on TSM where he was absolutely invisible, not at the right spots at the right time. It almost looked like a different player if you were looking at the VODs from the 2 different splits.
Right, and you also had the fact that when you were with that TSM roster filled with basically 4 out of the 5 positions of veterans here in the LCS, and then you add in Mike Young and the inexperience that he did have internationally as well at that time. You had to catch him up with some performance mental coaches as well, things like that. There were a lot going on there that didn't contribute to the team's success.
Yeah, and we know that behind the scenes there was a lot of things not working with whether it was player personalities, coaching staff. It was just a bit of a mess with that TSM roster, and unfortunately for Mike Young, he suffered a lot of the criticism when it came to that struggle of the TSM roster. But remember, they were rolling headed into playoffs before the massive clutch upset, which denied them their 11th straight final in the LCS. So Mike Young in at 7. 6 and 5 have to be combined because their careers are now forever linked. We're talking about AKAADIAN and GRIG, who had very similar time and numbers. Just look at how similar their numbers are that they played on TSM. If you have to give an edge one way, I would have to go AKAADIAN a spot ahead of GRIG.
I think the numbers will, even as close as they are, the better record here, I would say I'd go with AKAADIAN as well. And when you're talking about the TSM jungler position, and you're talking about, okay, being a graveyard here, you have to remember that, yes, there still was success here at certain moments with each individual player here. AKAADIAN, TSM reaching all the way until the spring finals, and then finding, of course, well, you can't really just walk up to Baron as Ezreal and expect that you can just do whatever you want.
AKAADIAN was good in that series. People were TSM's
he wasn't the one on Ezreal, we'll say that.
Ezreal jungle, a thing of the past, definitely. But you were excited to maybe see him against international competition, what he could do. Obviously didn't end up happening. But throughout spring, when they went on their incredible run, it was AKAADIAN who was there. And even in summer, when you started jumping back and forth, even though GRIG picked up some wins early in the split, AKAADIAN still looked like he was more comfortable within the roster. So he gets the nod ahead. It is hilarious, by the way, that after TSM, they both go to Dignitas. And now AKAADIAN's on Dignitas Academy. GRIG is the starter. Who knows when they swap roles there.
Both still in the same brand new organization for them, but still together. And when you're thinking about, again, the performances that they had, and it's really a story of almost what could have been here for TSM, because both of them had their moments of success, and both of them showed you that, you know what, with a bit more time here with this roster, continuing to develop and grow and go through different situations, you can see them becoming a better overall unit here, and that just never came into fruition on their time with TSM.
And all these guys came within the last 2 years, really last year and a half in the roster, and 3 out of the 4, we're going to exclude Mike Young in this one. Some of it to blame is definitely the organization, Team Solo Mid itself, with how they dealt with roster moves and when they were bringing in these guys. Mike Young, okay, it was an experiment, and I think people were hyped about it. It obviously didn't work, but the other 3 guys were really hung out to dry.
Got to find a way to do better if you're the TSM organization for that. And again, it's just one of those things where, hey, it seems to always be happening to the jungler role on TSM, and to have it this many times now that you got a list where 8 positions can be filled out here means there's something going on here behind the scenes.
It is probably the most heavily scrutinized position in the entire LCS, at the very least, within North America, because you always have the expectations of that mid-jungle duo working a little bit of magic when Bjergsen is continued to stay in that mid lane. Coming up after the break, the countdown continues, and we have the era of the European imports as it began in North America. Ladies and gentlemen, we have returned to League Unlock. Eric and Mark here with you guys, continuing to count down the junglers in the history of Team Solo Mid. It is a very illustrious and star-studded list that has been so heavily scrutinized. You feel bad for how much pressure is put on a lot of these guys, and we are now entering the era where the European imports came in to go alongside Bjergsen. Who knows if he called, he said, I want some people from my homeland to take part in that jungle position.
Need to be taking over, bringing over all the Danes here over to North America, and especially to TSM to be playing here for the squad.
Yeah, and that's kind of when this Danish meme began. It started with Bjergsen, but when guys like SANTORIN came in, who was in at number 4, he came in as very unproven and onto a TSM roster where it's championship or bust, basically, and having this rookie who not many people knew about. He had played in some of the challenger scenes in Europe and North America. He came in, got Rookie of the Split. He won an LCS title. He went to Worlds. He won an IEM with TSM, which was the peak of 2015 when they could win an international event. And the reason he's not higher ahead of number 3 on this list, he played a full year with TSM, MSI and Worlds 2-9 record at those events. Doesn't all fall on SANTORIN, but he did not live up to the competition.
Comes in with a bang, absolutely. SANTORIN rocked the LCS as he came in, unproven for the most part, and manages to put through the performances that you wouldn't have expected whatsoever. Really was that star that they needed kind of in the early part of that time. And then as you get towards these international events, that's where you start to see the weakness come through here and where you find himself at number 4 in this rankings of the TSM junglers. Simply not good enough on his own merit, and the whole team as well at those international events just did not get anywhere close to acceptable results here for the TSM organization, and even for how SANTORIN has proven himself as an individual professional player. This was not up to that level.
And the historical remembrance of his time on TSM is he was very passive, maybe a KDA jungler, which is not something you hear with junglers very often, but there were early games where he was almost invisible, had a low kill participation pre-15 minutes, and then this is where the meme really took hold of the junglers on TSM being a ward, because that is all he provided to Bjergsen. That's not fair. They still had pretty decent synergy, but yes, the early game wasn't always there for him.
The memes always shine through, of course, into what everyone remembers, but they do have to look back a little bit deeper and do have to give your credit here over to what was going on domestically. The successes were absolutely there with SANTORIN and for TSM, but when it all added up internationally, it was never enough and never to the acceptable levels of the organization. And given the success that you had domestically, it wasn't acceptable.
And to his credit, I mean, after TSM, he only improved as a jungler. And with FlyQuest, the early game and kill participation, everything is run through him. It's always near the top of LCS junglers, regardless of how FlyQuest are doing. But this ranking is specifically for your time on Team Solo Mid. So he's in at number 4. His buddy Amazing is in at number 3, who only had a half split with TSM. They obviously won the LCS championship, and the reason he's a spot ahead is because the peak performances that we saw from Amazing were at the highest level, at least in North America. He showed up on the world stage and helped TSM get out of groups, Mark. It did happen. If you weren't watching way back then, he did. TSM got out of groups in 2014. What a life, what a thought.
It's weird to think that there's kind of separate pockets in the league fandom here of remembering certain times of TSM. If you're more recent, man, talking about a lot of these successes and actually going to international events seems strange to talk about TSM. But then even you go a little further, yes, this was an organization that not only did they make it to these events, they were getting out of these groups, and this one is Amazing, was a big part of that reason why they were able to get out of there in the first place. His performance and play definitely translated exactly to the international level, and he was certainly the one performing and bringing the level of Team Solo Mid's performance to what was necessary to get to that next stage.
And he and Bjergsen pretty much immediately had fantastic synergy. He was the year before SANTORIN, so really the first European jungler and the first real replacement for the odd one, and he absolutely destroyed North America. He looked really good, and I know some of the games, as is tradition, there's stretches where TSM junglers look underwhelming, but against some of the best junglers in the world, he absolutely held his own, more than held his own, and TSM was stomping in some of these group stage matches in 2014.
Overall, when you think about the 2014 Team Solo Mid roster and the way that they had everything ended, you can't be looking at Amazing as a single-handed, his performance not leveling out to being what it needed. He was absolutely delivering exactly what you needed to from the TSM jungler, and for him, hey, can't say any more than third ranking here on this list.
And remember, when we're talking about these junglers, you got to keep in mind that the majority of these guys, after their time on TSM, they still found starting spots. There was a time in 2019 where former TSM junglers were making up almost half of the other rosters, with Svenskeren, SANTORIN, Amazing was jungling, and then, you know, TSM had 3 junglers themselves. So it's just one of the most interesting storylines when it comes to a specific role within the game.
And one of the things I always remember about Amazing's time with TSM is that partnership, that chemistry that he was able to build with Bjergsen in the mid lane. It's something so strong that even here, even to this point in date, when you just had this past off season, we had rumors about Bjergsen wanting Amazing to join back up here to work together again. That is the type of level of chemistry that these two developed here in the way that they played back in 2014.
No matter how bad the ending is for these TSM junglers, they always have nothing but praise when talking about Bjergsen and working with him on TSM. Coming up after the break, the final 2 junglers in TSM's history, and when you're there for the longest, there's a good chance it's because you're the greatest. The wait is over here on League Unlock. Eric and Mark here with you guys because we're continuing the TSM jungler countdown 8-1. It is the top 2 that are left, and it's no surprise that they are the 2 longest tenured members when it comes to jungling of Team Solo Mid as an organization.
Hey, when you're looking at these 2, you got to be thinking about the past, what set up the organization, and specifically this jungler role here from the very beginning of time here with the organization, and as well looking at who is the best, who achieved the most and brought the most success here to Team Solo Mid in that jungler position, both of them slotting into this top 2.
And you might argue that the most successful era of TSM came, well, very early on in the days of League of Legends. We're talking 2011 to 2014. Most people probably not following, not playing the game, or, you know, were in middle school at this point. But the odd one was the OG jungler for Team Solo Mid, the original Baylife, an absolute fan favorite. And when you're taking account this list, one of the biggest attributes is longevity and obviously success within the roster. And the odd one had leaps and bounds of success. TSM was far and away the best North American team pre-LCS, and they were throughout a lot of the LCS as well. But he did win the inaugural spring split with them, couple of MLGs, an IPL, and he was there for 3 years almost.
Hey, man, this is an impressive list of accomplishments here from the odd one, but I think the most impressive one actually has to go to probably that in this day and age, back in 2011, which still, day and age, hey, we'll get to there, it still fits, is that he contracted scurvy from playing and practicing too much here with the team and not getting his vitamin C. That this man defeated scurvy in this day and age. That is exactly one of the accomplishments I want to put here with his time on TSM. That's how much gaming was going on.
Microwave dinners and soda pop. That was his diet.
I'm telling you, we've come a long way as gamers to get to the levels of, you know, food that we're eating and what
Think TSM had a nutritionalist?
Hey, you got to be looking after what you're putting into your body. The odd one, he wasn't looking after what he's putting in his body, and he certainly wasn't looking after any of the opposing teammates here because he was dishing it out for the squad. Amazing. This is the one that you got to remember here, the play at Baron as Elise there. That one immortalized forever in the Ignite music video.
Ignore the scoreboard in that game.
Hey,
TSM was
that doesn't count. Doesn't count. It's all about the sick plays there. The odd one had his own individual sick plays as well, but certainly the ones you got to be thinking about is all the success that they definitely had early on as an organization at the very beginning here. He was a major part of that. One of the first junglers ever to be tracking the spawn timers for the jungle camps, which, hey, seems pretty basic.
You had to type
now.
it out.
Back in the day, that was a big deal here, and he absolutely proved his value.
Yeah, and one of the pioneers of counter jungling because of that, because opposing junglers, whoa, this guy knows when my red buff spawned. Sounds absolutely ridiculous now, but you know, we weren't as babied back then. You had to use that old brain of yours to count.
Hey, the odd one had that brain, and he was the one working it here for the rest of the Team Solo Mid squad. Scurvy or not, this man got the job done here for Team Solo Mid.
Yeah, and you were rarely talking about him as one of the best junglers in North America or best junglers in the world, but he still was incredibly consistent throughout his time on TSM, and he was there for a very long time. But the man who is number one, there's really no question about it. He also had the longevity, 2 full years with TSM, 3 titles in a row. It is Svenskeren. I know he was the scapegoat for the World Championships, where these hyped up TSM rosters did not deliver on expectations. But when you're talking about peak levels of jungling, the domestic and still international success, because they did get to these events, no doubt Svenskeren is the best jungler that TSM's ever had.
Best jungler that TSM has ever had. Really comes through here, getting those 3-time LCS champion. That was a big one here.
Back to back.
First time ever for a TSM jungler to achieve that level of success. And then you're right here, the scapegoat from these world championship, world performances here. And the big one here to really take away is, yes, were the performances, is he to blame here? And yes, when you look back at those times, you can think, yes, there were some of these invades that were maybe not communicated as well and that he has to take his share of the blame for. But certainly when you look at the rest of it and the way that the team played and how they operated, he is such a vital part of that success, and he has continued in his career to show those strengths off, specifically most recently with Cloud9, and now wishing him the best here with Evil Geniuses. But this is absolutely the best jungler that TSM has ever had.
I mean, almost a 70% win rate is absolutely insane for a 2-year stretch. And even though he wasn't on the team as long as the odd one, just because of how pro play is, 7 years later, he played still almost 100 more games than him. So yeah, he still probably played more than the odd one, and he had the 5th most games played of anyone on TSM, not just junglers, but of all time, right behind guys like Bjergsen, obviously, Dyrus, Wild Turtle. So he is synonymous with TSM. It's still his most remembered timeline of any roster, and give him credit. He was never really looked at as a ward. He was blamed for getting caught out and dying.
When you're thinking about Svenskeren, one of my favorite things about him and his time with TSM is to think back on the games that he was able to play Lee Sin. That is his champion that he is known for being the best at and the way he performed. And that's one of those ones when you think back on the other junglers for TSM, there maybe isn't a specific champion that you can remember being so excited to see pick and bans and say, yes, I'm going to get this play to come through.
Odd one Maokai?
That's not the type of excitement I'm talking about here. But Svenskeren getting the Lee Sin, man, that was one excitable blind man there rolling through the jungle.
And we don't have Dardoch on this list. Svenskeren is no question number 1. Assuming Dardoch, at least plays this split, hopefully a year for TSM, there's a pretty good chance that he could climb up these ranks pretty quickly and sit firmly behind Svenskeren, even after a year, if things go relatively well for TSM.
Hey, I'm telling you, if TSM Dardoch just logs in as the TSM Dardoch
He's
account,
already number 5.
You're already jumping in big time on this list. Got high expectations, but no doubt that he will be able to meet them.
Higher expectations than when Mike Young came.
Higher, and I can guarantee that he will succeed.
Oh, guaranteed, Dardoch. What's succeeding? Title? LCS title?
Let's just say making it to an international event.
Making it to an international event, which means you at least have to perform well in one of these splits. But Dardoch, we know the talent is there to be right up there with Svenskeren. That's all the time today for League Unlock. Eric and Mark here with you guys. Thanks for hanging out. We'll catch you on the flip.